Excuse me, Mr. Hill?
Yes, Miss Wolf, and thanks again for being one of the first celebrities on our new show, Hey, Hey, It's Your DNA.
It's just that I was wondering if we could cut out the part where we learn that I have orc DNA.
I know, just like in Lord of the Rings. Isn't that fascinating?
It's just that I'm in the public eye, and being an orc has some, negative connotations.
I think you're not seeing how well you come across in that segment. When you get the news that you're 1/16th orc, there's this split second where you look like an orc. But then this tenderness sweeps across your face, and the audience is going to say, look at that sweet, lovely girl who just happens to be an orc.
Part orc. It's just that orc has connotations of squat, ugly...
Flat-nosed, filthy, bow-legged, sallow-skinned, fanged humanoids with a taste for human flesh. Yes, yes, yes. But there's a lot of new scholarship being done on their art and balladry. They've been misjudged, like the Vikings.
They're not like the Vikings.
They're a little like the Vikings. Look, it's not like we're saying you killed Frodo.
Could we please lower our voice when we're talking about Illing K. Odo Frey?
It could be worse. Chris Brown found out he was cousins with the Vaders.
Big surprise. Today, the nose wrestles with Ben Affleck's Bad News, an essay by a controversial photographer, and our culture of endless reboots and reunions. And now he's up for the lead in the reboot of Catwoman, Colin McEnroe.
I am up for the lead in the new Catwoman. The problem is that Carolyn Payne, also one of our guests here today, she's also up for the lead. And I think you'd be a better Catwoman than me.
I think I might look a little better in the suit.
Yeah. Well, I could tie it down. I could take diuretics. I'll do what I have to do to get the part. Yes. Anyway, there never needs to be a reboot of Catwoman because really, what else is there left to say after Halle Berry got through with that? Anyway, we're not talking about that right away. We're talking. First of all, let me tell you who's on the nose. Well, you just heard Carolyn Payne. She is a comedian, an actress, a dance impresario, and a dancer, and many other things besides. A blogger. And we have Luis Figueroa. He is a professor at Trinity College, and also over at Trinity College running Trinity Cine Studio is James Hanley. That's our panel today. And we're going to start out. I feel like we're going to have to work hard to come up with some disagreements about this, but maybe we can find something. Or, even if we don't disagree about it, James can wrinkle his nose more ferociously at it than the rest of us. Maybe that'll be the big difference. So Ben Affleck. In fact, as you sort of heard referenced in that intro, Ben Affleck was to be on a program and is on a program called Finding Your Roots. It's a PBS show. It's hosted by Henry Louis Gates. And the premise, as I understand it, is that Henry Louis Gates kind of delves into your background and finds out who you really are, what your bloodlines really are. These days, of course, with DNA, you can find out all kinds of things about people. But Ben Affleck did not want anyone to know that his great-great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Cole, was a Georgia slave owner in the mid-1800s. And so he actually asked if that could be not included, and it apparently was not. And the show's producer is, in fact, Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates, a very, very acclaimed historian and thinker. And he apparently did acquiesce to this request because when the episode aired in October, there was no mention of the star's slave-owning ancestor. And so, and I think it's is it WikiLeaks? Is this how we know about it?
Yes.
I think it is WikiLeaks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everything comes from WikiLeaks.
Everything from the collection from Sony Pictures.
Right. Yeah. So because
more to come.
Yeah, because of WikiLeaks, we have the emails about this. So Luis, you were the first one to tip us off to this. I mean, what does this all mean to you? I mean, this is sort of right in your wheelhouse in the sense that a lot of the teaching you do is kind of about the history of the Americas and some of the things we're not all that proud of.
Well, first of all, it reminded me of some stories that I uncovered when I was doing research for my first book, which dealt with slavery and after slavery in a region in southeastern Puerto Rico. And I remember vividly trying to track down people who were descendant not only of the slaves but also the slave owners and other people in that area. And finally was able to track down some people, and one of them actually had been led to believe in family lore for generations since the 19th century that they descended from a sugar planter who was a big slave owner in this region. This region is called Guayama. And when I met this lady, I had to disabuse her of this family lore because I said, no, actually, no. You descend from this Spanish immigrant who was someone who raised horses and drove like a cab in the town. That's nothing to do. So there are people who actually feel proud of the things.
They wanted to be slave
They
owners.
wanted to be slave owners. They wanted to be descendants of slave owners. So I wanted to start with that one story because it's the opposite of Ben Affleck's, right? He doesn't want to be uncovered as someone who's descended from slave owners. And there are people who actually were proud of that.
See, that surprises me because in general, my theory of humanity is that everybody in France has relatives who were in the resistance. Nobody collaborated. Everybody in Germany, has no Nazi ancestors, and it's kind of like that, right?
Yeah, well, but there are people who do not focus so much on the fact that their ancestors were slave owners, rather that they were big plantation owners, and all that entails that, right? That there's a certain aristocracy.
Gone with the wind, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and so that's another type. So I wanted to start by mentioning that story because it's on the complete opposite end of the situation with Ben Affleck. We are not responsible, ultimately, for what our ancestors did in certain ways. I mean, so if I one day was ever to uncover a situation like this, so I'll talk about it. Why try to hide it? That's not a very intelligent way of dealing with it, really.
Well, I'm saving James for last on this. So, Carolyn, you're an entertainer. You could at some point be asked to do something like this. Would you be? Does Ben Affleck have a leg to stand on, or for that matter, does Henry Louis Gates have a leg to stand on?
I mean, I think that the nature of being in the public eye is to kind of want to cultivate the image that the public has of you to the best of your ability. And if you're going to agree to do something that's going to be digging in your past, I mean, this is the equivalent of like having a camera over and letting them go through your closet with you. Mm-hmm. You can't get upset when they find embarrassing things. You have to be like, yeah, that's right. I wear tie-dye sometimes. It happens. It's kind of like he agreed to do this. He can't be upset with what they find, and he can't be held responsible for his ancestors. I mean, it was a completely different time period, and I just think that him trying to cover this up is sort of more embarrassing than
also embarrassing. And I hadn't seen it until this morning, but there's actually a clip that I saw. I think it's up on the CNN website from the show itself, where we do see Ben Affleck preening over the fact that he had a Revolutionary War ancestor who was a significant patriot, as they say, and. You can't have it both ways. You can't be all excited about the good guy, or at least theoretically the good guy, and then cover up the bad guy. So, James, take us even deeper into the abyss that this represents.
My thought about Ben Affleck has always been, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I always felt he was sort of vaguely interesting as an actor, but I never really... Like, I look at somebody like Jake Gyllenhaal, for example, and how he descends into the incredible complexity of his characters. And I always thought about Ben Affleck. He seemed interesting, but somehow skating on the surface. And so one of the fascinating things about this seems to me is that if he had a sort of awareness, a sort of self-awareness that wasn't about ego, he would actually see this as an interesting way to give himself texture as a person, but that would also translate to his acting. That here would be an opportunity to deal with complexity, quite apart from any sort of broad nature of being honest. I think that it would actually have served him well. And then to be tripped up by this in concert with a show, as you pointed out, that I mean, the whole point is to expose the past. And to have somebody like Henry Louis Gates, who, to me, I mean, here his whole reputation is in tatters because of this stupid thing. I mean, how could you send an email like that and sort of, say, what should we do about this? Well, that's sort of like inviting the executive in Hollywood to say, oh, no, please, he's a big client. Don't say anything. I mean, the mind reels at that possibility.
I hadn't really thought about the connection between art and life in that way. And when you think about I'm thinking about his signature roles now, and quite frequently he is kind of the one who's sort of pulled along in an odd way, as opposed to, I mean, in Good Will Hunting, it's really Matt Damon, and then he's just kind of this guy.
This is going to sound awful. I still think of him as, I'm like, oh, Matt Damon's sidekick.
Yeah.
He was sort of the twofer that came along with that.
Well, there's
even in Gone Girl, he's kind of the dupe.
What about the character he plays in The Town? which
Yes,
is a film.
yeah,
He actually was
right,
a filmmaker.
right.
He was a director, wasn't he, in that
Yeah,
film?
yeah.
So in that character, the psychology of that character might be interesting to think about in the context of this story.
But I think that if you take somebody who's in that sort of position, I mean, he clearly has an ego, but it's kind of, to me, a misdirected ego that really he thinks of himself as something different. And so Gone Girl was a curious thing, absolutely, because he really seems to be out of touch with it. And so it's like that's his real self that's coming out.
But I don't know,
is the appearance.
Yeah,
so
but I don't
that's
know if
bizarre.
I don't know if you guys have seen the clip of his participation in a show, Bill Maher's show, where they were talking about Muslims and how Islam is a religion that generates by itself terrorism or violence, extremism, and so on. He, surprisingly perhaps, he was very forceful and he was very vehement in attacking the ideas that Bill Maher was defending and one of his guests was defending along those lines. And he tried to be like the moral conscience in the panel in terms of being more ecumenical in accepting religions and not thinking that there's something intrinsically wrong with Islam, which, we can debate that is not the case. It's only a minority of people. So for me, the story also of this denial of his ancestry of slave owners was a big contrast with that kind of like self-righteous, in a way forceful, ethical person attitude that he had in the Bill Maher show.
I was aware of that incident, although I refused to watch it because to me the definition, the epitomization of public discourse drained of all meaning would be a debate between Bill Maher and Ben Affleck. I sort of feel like, really, is that really kind of like Ben Affleck is somebody we need? He needs to be heard from.
And I have got the feeling about that particular incident too, was that it almost like they went out, the show's producers went out looking for a foil for this to create that, actually, and that as if there was a specification, that you do this kind of thing. And it goes to the heart of what I'm saying about Ben Affleck as an appearance publicly. I mean, I don't know about him sort of privately, but I think that this incident has revealed something about him privately, but his whole public image is something that is very carefully arranged and carefully set up. And so when it comes to something like this, where something of supposedly what he thinks his private nature comes out, that's when you tend to expose who people really are. I mean, that's and that's why it's so disturbing about Henry Louis Gates, for example, that after all of his integrity that he's shown in the past, I mean, obviously you have to think, well, can you forgive somebody for a transgression? But this is such a fundamental change of sort of what your image is. And it's a fascinating connection with Ben Affleck and his careful image and the appearance you see of him in film.
It is, I mean, first of all, yes, it's a big disappointment. I mean, Henry Louis Gates, this whole, as James and Luis are both saying, it's the mission of this program, apparently, is to call our attention to this kind of thing. And all it took was a big celebrity to knock down all those intentions. I mean, and I bet you Henry Louis Gates does have the courage to stand up to all kinds of other enormous barricades and menaces in public life, but not a celebrity. That's just, but I mean, the thing about the acting is really interesting, the thing that James is saying, because acting is sort of going there. Right? And you think about Michael Fassbender as a slave owner in 12 Years a Slave, where it just is, he's so fearlessly able to put on just to wear that evil, and you just realize he's just going there. Yeah. He's really exploring the brutality of this man. And you realize if you're Ben Affleck, if you're going to skate past stuff like this, you may never do any really great acting.
Yeah, you're going to skate past it when creating that character too, which I do kind of feel that way about Ben Affleck as an actor. I agree with you, James, that he's more there's a surface that doesn't ever get penetrated with him. But I think as an actor, and I know for me, especially with like comedy stuff, it's the stuff that makes you vulnerable and kind of those like darker sides of you that you tap into. And
the things that make you afraid yourself.
Right.
And that you can show to other people.
Exactly. And the things about yourself that you don't like or the things that you don't want to be there are the things that you can tap into and create these very real and vivid characters.
Yes.
All right. Keep that in mind as we plunge into Sally Mann in just a second. But hold on. Let's talk to Ray in Tallinn. Hi, Ray. You're on the air.
Hello, Colin.
What's on your mind?
What's on my mind is when I first heard that thing about Ben Affleck, what I thought of was the fact that so many Americans, particularly anybody who has ancestry going back to the 18th century, so many white Americans had slaves. It was common in Connecticut. It was common in the all through the North and the South. Even small farmers kept slaves. And many of us, including me, have slave owners in our past. And for something like Ben Affleck, it's just not him, but thank goodness he came forward to teach us a lesson.
Yes.
If people want to get past the race problems in this country, you got to get past your individual racism, but you also got to come to grips with the fact that the race situation we have in this country is the responsibility of a lot of our ancestors.
Yeah, hence Ta-Nehisi Coates' piece from last year that was so fabulous. All right, well, we're going to make go ahead.
Sorry, there was one other thing about that related to what the caller said. It's not just the ancestors of the past, it's where all our money comes from.
Right.
It's the reason why the United States is the economic power that it is.
Yeah.
I just one very quick thing is that from the Latin American perspective, there's a wrinkle that a lot of Americans don't consider, is that in Latin America, there were a lot of people who were of African descent, of various proportions of African descent, who were slave owners. And including there were Africans who, after they freed themselves from slavery, they became involved in slavery as slave owners or even involved in the slave trade. So when you issue exploring roots in the context of a place like Brazil, for example, or Cuba or other places, it's more complicated than simply, the people who need to hide something are only people who are of direct, exclusive European descent. That's not the case. I could go on to give you examples of people who were slave owners who were actually at least racially mixed with some partial heritage of being African.
Shame is such an interesting thing anyway, and when I was working on the book about my father, which sort of did a little bit about my family, I was in Ireland and I discovered there's this horrible thing from the famine, and it's called taking soup. And what it means is that the Catholics in Ireland who were starving, but there was a thing that you could do if you would effectively be a Protestant for a while or attend, Church of England services or something like that. You could get soup. They'd feed you if you'd essentially renounce, at least temporarily, your Catholicism. And it was considered a mark of great shame to have done this. And about 2 days into my research in Ireland, this priest was going over stuff with me, and he said, "It looks like you took soup." I thought, oh well, we're all human. All right, so we're going to do a little transition from there to Sally Mann. Sally Mann's a really famous photographer. I don't know too much about photography, but if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, if you go to the Whitney, if you go to SF MoMA, go to many of the museums that exhibit photography in this country, you're going to see her work. But she became especially famous in the early 1990s for work that involved her children. They were living on this very remote farm, nobody else for miles around, and not a lot of things like electricity coming in. And she took photographs of her children. They were often nude. There was sometimes a sensuality about them. And when they were some of them were published in book form, and a few of them were published in the New York Times in the early 1990s. And there was sort of a hue and cry about them. And I'm not even exactly quite sure why, but for some reason or other, last weekend, the New York Times Study magazine revisited this with a lengthy essay by Sally Mann about everything that happened afterwards and the way that she felt attacked, the way that she was attacked in publications like the Wall Street Journal, the fact that she even visited an FBI profiler at one point to see whether or not she was, in fact, producing material about her own children that would be bait for pedophilia, to figure out what her culpability and, I guess, to go back to Ben Affleck, complicity might be in anything horrible. So, and I think it's an essay that you can have multiple responses to, too. So, Carolyn, I'm going to start out with you because you made the mistake of telling me at least that you found the essay interesting. What did you find interesting about it?
Just how somebody who creates art has such a different perception of what they're putting out there and just how art is perceived in general. That, what I'm seeing in something is it's a totally different experience than the person you're standing next to, even though you're experiencing it at that exact same moment. So I just found it fascinating that this woman, in looking through the pictures, I can understand in some ways where some of the controversy would have come from. And I was kind of more shocked that she sort of seemed to be so clueless about it in some ways, that she was like, I just didn't think that could happen. But at the same time, I loved that her art was just driven by this innocence, and this is how she saw the world and how she wanted to portray how she was depicting her kids. But I was just fascinated from the art perspective of how art can be seen so differently and so drastically differently.
So, yeah, one of the tensions in the essay, obviously, is she's a mother of these kids. She's a photographer of these kids, and she splits those two roles up in the essay. She says, really, when I'm doing one, I'm not so much the other. And then she asks, but am I responsible for the way in which my art is perceived, too? I know what my intentions are in art. Do I bear a responsibility for perceptions that were never placed there in the first place? I don't know, James, did you find anything interesting about her argument?
Yes, I mean, I do. I sort of sympathize about it, but I agree with Caroline that it's like you've really got to have an awareness that, especially now, she's writing now, to have an understanding of exactly what was going on with pictures that certainly to some people would be provocative. And I think that one thing you have to recognize as an artist of any kind is that you have to be ready to deal with the consequences of provocation, because that's what makes you an artist in a way, that you're taking a chance with something that you believe in. And she makes a very good argument for her art, but I think there's a certain naivete and almost sort of wounded sort of sense of being misunderstood that this could come out in a different way and that she could be victimized by, crazy people online and pedophiles and people who would see it as an exploitation of her children and so on. I think that there is an innocence to it, and they're very beautiful pictures, but I think that you have to see that you're going to have to fight for this, and I'm a little disturbed that she sees it as a sort of, surprise like this.
Wait a minute. Maybe I did not read the article correctly, but was her intention to provoke? I mean, let's say on like Mapplethorpe with the crucifix in a liquid that shouldn't be put in, where clearly he was intending to provoke.
No,
was
I
her
don't
intention? I don't think it was to provoke.
Well, the interesting thing about Mapplethorpe is that some of the provocative exhibits of Mapplethorpe came out at around the same time that these pictures came out. And so there's also the fact that you've got this new presence, which is the availability of image everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
And so everybody can see it. And, it's one thing that if you're a photographer who's taken this series of pictures that you put in a book and it goes into a book that's selling for $100 and hardly anybody actually sees it, and it perhaps causes some kind of a stir, but these pictures became very different. Because of the internet, it's something entirely different.
But so, I think he's right to bring up Mapplethorpe, too, just because she feels very lumped in. Let me just quickly say, if you read this essay, if you have thoughts about it, our number, 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. But do so quickly because we won't be able to stay with this for too long. But, I think part of Sally Mann's argument is I got lumped in, that this was sort of Mapplethorpe was hot, but also Andres Serrano is the artist who put the crucifix in the urine.
So I got it wrong.
But that was also right around that time. Karen Finley was the so-called chocolate-smeared woman. I didn't mean to look at you when I said chocolate-smeared woman.
That's the result of the leveling effect of the internet, though. That's bound to happen because there isn't actually there's a vast number of people who are looking at these images who are not making any distinction between different artists.
Well, and these pictures were pre-internet time.
That was not
yes,
that.
exactly.
So, and one of the other things that I was fascinated with in the article was where she talks about her children who are the subjects, and she calls them actors. She says that when I thought that was really interesting that she would imply that they're creating these characters for her. I did wonder why her children were always running around without clothes on, but they live in the woods, and it seemed, but it wasn't. But that's the point. Even though these photos do, I get where this can pull that like Law and Order SVU sort of vibe, but it doesn't, because they really are just such beautiful, quiet captures. But the children's reaction to them and how they see themselves in their bodies, like her daughter who didn't want to wear a dress that when she moved her arms, it like showed part of her chest, and she was like a young kid, and the artist, her mother, was kind of shocked that she would feel such so ashamed.
Well, that incident, it comes up because they're about to go to an exhibit of these photographs.
Right.
And it turns out that Jessie doesn't want to wear a dress where her chest is a little bit visible through the oversized armholes. And one of her friends says, Jessie, I don't get it. Why on earth would you care if someone can see your chest through the armholes when you're going to be in a room with a bunch of pictures that show the same completely bare chest? And she says, well, that's not my chest. Those are photographs. So she's making the distinction that her mother wants her to make.
Yes, exactly.
That's a very crucial thing. That, I mean, especially if these kids are growing up. I mean, I don't know if they were homeschooled or how much contact they had at the time with other kids. But I mean, this is sort of like the raising of the kids in that environment, and the taking the pictures is almost like an art exhibit in itself. I mean, it's an expression of art, and everybody's a part of it. And there were curious little details, like when the Wall Street Journal ran that article with a picture of the naked child with black bands on parts of the body, that she wrote, the child wrote a letter complaining to the Wall Street Journal. And there's a sort of, like intrigue upon intrigue as to how
this
that
would have been an interesting house to grow up in.
You're not getting any dessert until you write a letter to the Wall Street Journal.
No, but I think that what happened with that picture, the article was a very, very, very devastating critical article against the pictures, and they published this picture of her daughter, one of her daughters, without her permission. To first, and second, they, from an artistic perspective, they mutilated a work of art in order to include it in an article in a way that was very salacious.
Yeah.
That is not the way the pictures were taken, nor exhibited, nor published. I mean, the first exhibition was in 1990. The book was published in 1992. We have to just clarify that for the audience, because this is pre-internet days, as Caroline was saying. But what happens is that the way they circulated by others as part of their critique, and in that sense, I mean, one of the quote that I wrote from the article that I thought was very useful for any conversation about this is, quote, it is her response in this essay in the New York Times. It is a banal point that no artist can predict how each image will be received by each viewer, and that what is devoid of erotic meaning to one person is the stuff of another person's wildest fantasies. So to me, really, a lot of the critique of the pictures speaks more about the mindset of the people who wrote the critiques, of how they saw the pictures, what they put into them from their own psychological perspectives, whatever their erotic fantasies might be, than what they were.
We're going to grab a quick break here. We have some calls. I want to grab a few calls on the other side. We got to leave time for reboots and, of course, the adult exploration of the Muppets, which I don't know how that fits into the conversation we're having right now, but I'm alarmed that it might.
In the big picture, in the big picture I see it
All right, let me grab a few phone calls here with us. By the way, Carolyn Payne, Luis Figueroa, James Hanley. This is The Nose. We're talking about Sally Mann's essay. I think it's called Sally Mann Exposed, Sally Mann's Exposure, something like that, that ran in the New York Times last Sunday. Here's Peter in, oops, I didn't do it. Here's Peter in Harwinton. Hi, you're on the air. But you're not on the air. Peter, are you there? No, he might have given up. All right. Fortunately, we have, I hope, Dan in Stores. Hi, Dan, you're on the air.
Hi, the panel was discussing the artist's surprise over the controversy, and I just wanted to say that I'm not sure you can always take an artist's word for whether they're surprised. I think artists, when they can't gain attention for their work just on their merits, or they can't rise above their colleagues, they do something controversial, and when they say they didn't intend for it to be controversial, I think that's a little bit of a defense. You know, they want to believe as artists that they were recognized for their art, and if they just say, well, I was a carnival barker and I did something to infuriate people so that it would get people looking at my work, I mean, that demeans their art, so as human beings, you tend not to say that, but I think that's always in there or often in there somewhere. I don't think it's an accident when people make a Virgin Mary out of poo and they just say, well, that was just what I had at hand, or that was the best thing to express my art.
Well, yeah, it was elephant poo, so they probably didn't have it just sitting around anyway. And I think your point is right, that this, you know, there are one of our arguments is I'm just capturing my children doing things that they do. On the other hand, I mean, we were treated to the picture of her new daughter in her white roller skates, and I just don't think children do just naturally decide they're going to roller skate nude. As somebody, one of the commenters, by the way, read the comments to this article because it's, first of all, you just want to be I would just love to be the New York Times and get comments like this. I work for The Current where most of the commenters are animals. These comments are really interesting and they really get you thinking about different things. But one person said, any kid who'd ever had a splinter would never be roller skating nude on a deck. That just doesn't really happen. And I do feel like the essay ends on a somewhat disingenuous note. She talks about how protected they felt down by the river in Lexington, Virginia, surrounded by cliffs and water and stuff like that. Well, you were protected until you started hanging it up in museums and putting it in magazines. I mean, that's the issue here. Listen, we want to do a quick switch over to reboots. And reboots go on all the time. Reboots, remakes, however you want to call them. James, as someone who runs a movie theater, has to think all the time about how much he wants to put up with all this. Tucker Ives wrote, I know there's always a lot of discussion about lack of creativity, but there's more of an obsession with reunions and not just one-off primetime TV specials. This week we have Full House, but we've also seen it with Arrested Development and Community in a weird way. Boy Meets World. These are all TV shows that are being rebooted. Movies are rebooted all the time as well. And then we've been informed that the Muppets are coming back, but this time the Muppets will be – well, the Muppets never went away. They don't have to come back. But this new Muppet thing is apparently going to explore from a mockumentary point of view some of the more adult issues of the Muppets. I'm looking around for the summary. I can't find the thing. But anyway, and that's sort of what we know about this. But Carolyn, first of all, do we want to know about the adult issues of the Muppets? I felt like we already know about the adult issues of the Muppets. I feel the Muppets are adults.
They are, but I just don't understand what they are going to be exposing us to with these adult issues. And they said that we're going to explore their personal lives. I feel like we already know enough about Kermie and Piggy's personal life. I don't really need an inside look into that, nor do I want it to get into that realm of that adult sitcom where, so I'm just picturing like Kermit getting feelings for another Muppet and trying to deal with this. And I just feel like it's not going to be a good thing for us. Although I am excited to see the Muppets come back on TV, and I think that there's potential for it to be great, but making it more adult, yeah.
Yes.
I think it's great to have the Muppets back, but I have to say that what's really going on here is it's an attempt to expand the franchise. One of the problems that the Muppets have had in the film versions especially has been convincing adults that they should come not just because they're bringing their kids, but because it has an adult sort of content and that therefore that should be amusing. It should have another layer. They're frantically trying to find that, I think. And so it's driven by something entirely different.
But I think the skill with the Muppets was always that it was really for adults.
But it doesn't. But they haven't really continued
well.
that in the way that they did. I agree. At the beginning, it did have that. But it has a kind of arch contrived quality now to it that doesn't have quite the...
That's the problem with all of these reboots and reunions.
Exactly,
they're all contrived and unnecessary for the most part.
Luis, did you have a take on all this?
I don't know why. Maybe I woke up on the wrong side of the bed today to be contrarian, but I wouldn't mind watching the remake of the Muppets where they are adults. In part because I have very little relationship with them. I don't know them very well. I was.
Is there a Puerto Rican version of the Muppets?
No,
there's a Puerto Rican Muppet, right?
No, I mean they were not in my radar screen when I was growing up. And my radar screen was the Flintstones. So that's because I'm older. And then
would you want to see Fred Flintstone get his prostate checked? I mean, that's the question.
That's a different one. But then for when I was raising my daughter early on, it was Barney. That was the thing. She was not really into the Muppets. So I don't even remember the name of the Muppet that is living inside a trash can. What was this guy?
Well, that's Oscar, and he's not. He's a separate Muppet.
Yeah, but that's the kind of story that I would like someone adult person to play and get into the bio of how you ended up living there. That's the one character that I identify with.
You want like an inside the actor studio about Oscar the Grouch?
No, I'd watch that. I bet you James Lipton's already done that though. I feel like that's already happened where he's
you remember that show with Gabriel Byrne where he was a psychiatrist? The Sessions, what was the name of that show?
Oh yeah. In therapy. In
treatment. That's a great show for anyone here. Actually, that's an early endorsement. Anyone here has not seen In Treatment with Gabriel Byrne, I really strongly recommend it. So I would like to see something like In Treatment mixed with the Muppets.
Now you've got a pitch.
Where
something.
The Muppets go to a psychiatrist to discuss their background, their experiences, before the show, during the show, having to deal with Big Bird's ego and things. I mean, that would make it for me a funny show to begin with.
I think somebody's busy working on this right now.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't. You should get that
trade.
copyright.
You just gave away an intellectual property. There are some other things that are going on here too, and one of them is, I don't know how many of you watched it. Betsy Kaplan sent around some Amy Schumer clips, and she sent around this tremendous Amy Schumer clip in which Amy stumbles upon this picnic, and it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Patricia Arquette and Tina Fey, and they're talking about, we can't use the word, but they're talking about sort of a moment at which an actress becomes less marketable. Market happens not to be the word that they use with the suffix able, but less marketable and less sexually marketable. And they're having a party to celebrate the fact that Julia Louis-Dreyfus has crossed this Rubicon, and it's very funny. And there's a million interesting things about it. And Amy Schumer plays this innocent who just kind of doesn't understand what's being talked about and has all kinds of questions. So they give examples of how this is happening to you. And Patricia Arquette says, you know it when they start remaking your movies with younger, more blanketable actresses. And she said they're already doing Boyhood with Selena Gomez in my role. And then all the actresses...
Tina Fey is like, that's going to make money.
It's going to make a lot of money, yeah. And I hadn't really thought about it that way before, but there's this kind of idea that, I think one of the adjustments that's represented by that does really happen too, right?
Of course, it happens all the time. This is one of the bedrock principles of Hollywood agents. That Hollywood agents who drive this whole thing are really, first of all, they're scanning constantly to see what the next possibility is to redo something, to redo a franchise, and it's cheaper to redo a franchise for lots of reasons. And one of the things is it's also recognizable out in the market. So if you can pull it off, you can do something that needs much less publicity than would otherwise be the case. It's part of the very nature of popular entertainment that you do that.
And it taps into the nostalgia factor.
Absolutely. And people, the nostalgia factor, people look fondly back on the past, and then there's a new generation of people who may discover it. And this is something that we go through in more intense cycles periodically in the film industry. It's like sequels, for instance, that you'll have the endless sequels that are expected to perform in the marketplace. Then they begin to falter, and then you begin to start seeing some new material.
Well, I feel like it's my age group specifically that is seeking and kind of really pulling in these like reboot reunion things, because all those shows like Full House, Boy Meets World, even the Muppet Show, these were things that I watched, and now it's like my age group is that internet, the millennial, and we're just kind of seeking sort of this return to.
Well, and there's a reassurance in that too. There's a kind of reassurance.
Although that Boy Meets World reboot that they did, and where now like he has a kid, is terrifying to me, because I'm the same age as that. Like I grew up with those people. Right. Like we were in junior high age group together.
See, now we are all Luis Figueroa. None of us have any idea what Boy Meets
Someone
World
out there
is
with me.
Or Full House. I am as estranged from Full House as Luis is from the Muppets. They just weren't sort of part. I had to write a joke about Full House earlier this week. I had to look up some names of characters. I had no idea.
Really?
I just don't know anything about that.
Is Full House something in poker?
Well, there's that too.
That's the only Full House that I know.
It's not about poker, however. Yeah. But I do think, one of the things we know is that it's not a completely depraved activity. There are good reboots. There are good remakes. The one that I always come back to is Heaven Can Wait is, I think every bit as good, if not better, than Here Comes Mr. Jordan. It's just absolutely brilliant. And the fact that it's based on old material, doesn't completely damn it. You could probably come up with your own examples.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples where it does succeed. I agree. I think that it's always going to happen, and you have to be discriminating about what is interesting that isn't just a rehash, that it actually takes it somewhere new. One of the examples on TV with sort of personalities driving it would be Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek, which transformed itself and actually morphed in different ways and brought in different characters and different shows, and it managed to actually expand its franchise enormously over the years because it was really interesting. It was well written for a period, and the characters were very identifiable, and that had a connection back to a previous generation of viewers, and new people were coming on. It's that kind of thing that if you think about the original producers who wanted to pull their money out of Star Trek, and then the great gold mine it turned out to be for Paramount later on, I mean, that's a lesson the industry is constantly aware of.
Yeah, there's another angle about reboots that I was thinking about last night and this morning, and that is not in terms of media production of film or television shows, but in terms of actually their people's lives, how people try to reinvent themselves in particular kind of situations. I could talk about music because that's something I do. I have, in fact, remixes of or covers of songs that actually work better than if you play the original one. I have respect with Aretha Franklin. It works better, the version that I play for people, far better than the original one. So
you're upsetting some purists out there.
Yes, I know, but one day maybe I'll show them. But I was also thinking about people in their own lives, how they try to reboot. And so I wonder if examples that you might have about this. Maybe ourselves, we have done this. I guess.
People do it all the time. And Fitzgerald famously said there were no second acts in American life. It's so obviously a wrong statement. There are second, third, endless numbers of acts. But I do feel as though we have a love. First of all, I just want to say, Carolyn, rather than damning your own generation, let's admit that we're all pretty bad this way. That one of the sort of goodies that was offered up to us in the Star Wars trailer that leaked last weekend or came out last weekend is you're going to get Han Solo and Chewbacca and Princess Leia. They're all coming back because you can't be happy no matter how old and ragged they look.
Yeah.
You have to have them back, and so that's not a failure of imagination or spirit that's confined to your generation.
It's true. And yes, the Star Wars franchise is an example that I was pretty done with Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I was done after the 3 prequels. But when I found out that they were incorporating the original actors, it made me excited about this because it's that reunion sense. And, I guess, they always say, like, the older you get, the more you want to be around and to know, like, the people you knew when you were young. I think it's that kind of sense.
2 shows that I definitely like to see reboot. One is Twilight Zone, and the other one is Twin Peaks.
Well, Twin
Peaks, they tried to.
Yeah, I think they've tried. In fact, they are going to do it, aren't they?
I think they should hire Lars von Trier to do Twin Peaks, a new version of Twin Peaks.
At least you are brimming with really good show business concepts. Really, you should just get on a plane to the coast and just
right
take
now.
meetings.
Stop talking now.
Stop talking to us and
Listen,
start taking meetings.
I'm going to take your advice. As soon as I turn in grades in May, I'm moving to LA.
You absolutely got to do that.
I think it wasn't David Lynch pulled out of that project. I think
he did. Yeah.
He did.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with endorsements after this.
I seen this movie before. I know the drug is the I've seen the film, read the book, and I know how it all works out. It's only love. I've seen this movie before.
I'm not sure I'm ready to live through all of Fozzie Bear's urology visits. Today's show was produced by Colin McEnroe and me, Kyone Wolf. Our intern is Kelsey Bissell. Greg Hill appeared in the intro and tweets for us at WNPR Colin, and the part of Bill Curry was played by the Swedish Chef. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff and the live-action reboot of Clutch and Cargo, visit our website, WNPR.org. On Monday's show, The Scramble catches up with the weekend. And now, back to the nose.
All right, it's time for the part of the nose. Every once in a while, just for copyright purposes, I have to say, I stole this idea from our friends at the Slate Culture Gab Fest. So this is an idea stolen from the Slate Culture Gab Fest called Endorsements. So James, what have you got? What would you like to endorse?
Well, at Cine Studio, we have a couple of festivals coming up. A really interesting one on this coming Saturday at 5 o'clock, the Real Youth Hartford Film Festival, which is films made by the Hartford school students, and they enter them in the festival, and they have a competition competition that night, and it's really a fun experience to come to that. And it's free admission starting at 5 o'clock on Saturday. Then the following week we have another festival, a Trinity Film Festival, which is filmmakers, college filmmakers from all over the country who enter their films, and that the festivities begin at 4 o'clock on May 2nd, on Saturday, May 2nd.
All right. Luis, what have you got for us?
Well, I finally was able to finish these seasons of House of Cards. And I must say that it was impressive in the storytelling, especially the last 4 or 5 episodes of this season, from episode like 35 to 39. And I want to endorse it because the cinematography, the editing, the acting, and 2 of these episodes were directed by Robin Wright herself. And she did a masterful job. And the other one, 2 of them were also directed by Agnieszka Holland, who's a Polish director, veteran Polish director. And so if you have never gotten into House of Cards and so on, well, maybe this is a way for me to try to stimulate you to doing. If you haven't caught up with season 3 of this year's season, I strongly recommend it. It's beautiful. It's almost like a film. It's not just simply television.
All right, Carolyn Payne.
Well, it's kind of a offshoot a little bit of what Luis said with Robin Wright Penn directing, or Robin Wright, I guess she goes by now. I am involved with the Women Only Film Project, and it is based here in Connecticut, but has films written by women, and it's all written by women, directed by women, female crews. So it's a really cool thing to be part of, and I'm really excited to be part of that. So keep an eye out for. They're going to be doing a festival connected with that, and all sorts of great women in the business empowerment. Also, really quickly, the Trash and Fashion Soiree by my friend Amy Murley. It's the 5th year. That is tomorrow night, Saturday night. They have a trash and fashion show, and it all is about educating about sustainability and is really a fun event.
All right, and that is where?
And it's at City Hall tomorrow night.
City Hall tomorrow night. All right. So I've got a few things here. First of all, there's a musician who's worked in Connecticut for a really long time. His name is Don Sonetti, and Don Sonetti is. He isn't just a guy who sings sea shanties. He is a sea shanty. I mean, he kind of is that. And apparently he's had some terrible health problems over the winter. And like a lot of musicians, he probably doesn't have very good health insurance. Hence, a lot of other musicians are trying to raise some money for him. So there's actually a thing called youcaring.com, and there's a medical fundraiser kind of on that site for Don Sonetti. And I know that there have been some concerts and will be some concerts. Don Sonetti was a founder of, among other things, the Morgans, which was sort of this really classic seagoing singing group for a long time. So coming up at the Sounding Board, I believe I'm looking at my thing here, I believe it's May 16th, something called the Portable Folk Festival. And an act is going to do a benefit for Don. So contact the Sounding Board, that's in West Hartford, I believe, and do something for Don Sonetti. Also, I'm going to endorse something I've never been to, but every year I mean to go to it, and because it always looks so great. It's called the Daffodil Fest in Meriden. And the people who put it together, I mean, I know they put a lot of work into it, and they have fireworks, and they really pick out the music groups. Like some of the really best local music groups are there. So I'm swearing this year, well, I better not, but I think I'm going to get to the Daffodil Fest. And then, so yeah, I've got time for a couple of other things. Just to piggyback on Luis, if you finished House of Cards and you crave something kind of like that, then you have to kind of know somebody. But there's this Danish series called Borgen, which is, I think, actually better than House of Cards. But anyway, it's fabulously acted. The thing is, I don't think you can stream it on Netflix. You could only get the discs that way, or know somebody who's got the boxed set or something. I mean, you sort of almost have to know somebody to get Borgen. But it really is good, and it really is worth it. And you learn a lot also about things like Denmark's rather strained relationship with Greenland, which I didn't know anything about. And then lastly, I never do this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to promote one of our own shows, which is and I can promote it because we've already recorded it. It's going to be on Tuesday. I've kind of gotten to know this really remarkable woman. Her name is Nancy Butler. She's somebody who had an MBA, had a very lucrative job in the defense industry down in the Beltway, and suddenly realized, what am I doing with my life? Went back to seminary, became a minister, founded her own church here in Hartford. It's an evangelical church that's very, very inclusive. It's very gay inclusive and welcoming of all lifestyles and all orientations And I mean, you can't get turned away from this place, even though they are evangelicals. She's a remarkable woman, and then she just got the worst possible news. She has a very, very horrible disease. She has ALS. We had a 1-hour conversation about this. It's going to be our Tuesday show. It's something I love all my shows, all the shows we do, but I'm especially invested in this, and I think you're going to meet a really remarkable person if you tune in on Tuesday. So don't miss that one. It's Tuesday. It's Nancy Butler. And thanks to James, and thanks to Luis, and thanks to Carolyn. We'll be back on Monday with The Scramble.
On the radio, baby. You me talking, laughing down on College Acting Road.
Ben Affleck and his slave-owning ancestor have at least one thing in common. Neither of them should be cast as Batman. Boom. Both of them hate the Yankees. Boom. Both of them deny having a relationship with Matt Damon. Boom. Actually, it says here that a slave-owning ancestor did have relations with Jebediah Damon.